Hey, are you feeling the chill of a long day weighing you down? Step out of the freezing, howling snowstorm and let the heavy wooden door click shut behind you. Leave the winter outside. Take a slow, deep breath. Fill your lungs with the golden, comforting scent of rising dough, melted butter, and warm wood smoke. Listen to the deep, steady roar of the brick oven and the soft, powdery rustle of flour on oak. The fire is lit. The bread is warm. You have nowhere else to be tonight. It is time to rest. Part 1. Arrival in the freezing night. The snow had been falling for hours. Not the kind of snow that announces itself. No, this was the quiet kind. The kind that settles without urgency, without drama, drifting down in great, slow curtains from a sky the color of pewter and old wool. Each flake descended with a patience that seemed almost deliberate, as though the night itself had decided to muffle the world, to press a gentle finger to its lips and ask everything. The cobblestones, the iron lampposts, the sleeping chimneys, to simply be still. The village road was barely a road anymore. It had become something softer, something hushed, a long, pale corridor of white, bordered on either side by shop fronts whose shuttered windows gathered snowdrift in their sills like sleeping eyelids gathering dreams. The cobblestones beneath were no longer visible. Only the faint, rounded suggestion of them remained, pressing up through the white like memories half forgotten. The traveler walked slowly. There was no reason to hurry. There was no sound worth hurrying toward. The whole village, if indeed anyone still lived behind those darkened windows and bolted doors, seemed to have long since surrendered itself to sleep. And perhaps that was right. Perhaps that was the only sensible thing to do on a night like this. Each footstep made a sound like the softest possible sigh. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. The snow gave way underfoot with that particular resistance that is almost a welcome, firm enough to hold you, soft enough to comfort you. The traveler's breath rose in small white clouds and dissolved into the larger whiteness of the air. The cold was extraordinary. Not violent, not cruel, but profound. It was the kind of cold that seemed to reach inside you, not to harm you, but to remind you of what warmth meant. It pressed against the cheeks like the flat of a cool hand. It settled along the bridge of the nose and the tips of the ears and the backs of the fingers where the gloves had worn thin. The traveler's cloak was thick and the wool was good, but the cold found the edges of things, the collar, the hem, the gap at the wrist, and seeped in with quiet persistence. The village lane curved gently to the left, and that was when it happened. It arrived before anything else did, before any light, before any sound, before any visible sign of what lay ahead. It came on a breath of air that moved against the still, snow-heavy night, subtle as a whisper, warm in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. At least, not yet. Sweet and alive and ancient. The smell of something breathing, something rising, something waking in the dark, even as everything else slept. It was the smell of bread in its earliest becoming. Not yet bread, not quite, but full of the promise of it, full of the warm potential of flour and water and time, and a quiet, patient heat. The traveler stopped walking, stood still in the middle of the snow-filled lane, and simply breathed. There was something else beneath the yeast, something golden and resinous. Low and slow burning, the faint perfume of hard wood meeting fire, of oak or ash releasing itself into warmth, of a hearth that had been burning for a long time and intended to go on burning still. It was a smell that did something to the chest, loosened something there, eased some tightness that had been gathering without notice over the long, cold miles. And beneath even that, threaded through the whole of it, the way a single clear note threads through a chord and makes it something more, was cinnamon. Not sharp at all. Soft cinnamon, the kind that has been warmed slowly, that has had time to open and breathe and release all its deepest sweetness into the surrounding air. Cinnamon that spoke of something wrapped in pastry, something dusted and browned and resting on a shelf somewhere not far from here, cooling gently in the amber-tinged air of a kitchen that had forgotten what winter felt like. The traveler breathed again, deeper this time, and then looked up. It was at the end of the lane, a shop front set slightly apart from its neighbors, broader than the others, its facade of dark-painted wood and dressed stone worn smooth by decades of winters, not unlike this one. But it was not the stonework that caught the eye, nor the painted sign above the door whose letters were presently too snow-dusted to read. It was the window. The window glowed. It glowed the way a lantern glows when you carry it into a dark room, not illuminating outward so much as breathing light, exhaling it softly into the surrounding dark. The light within was deep amber, the color of honey held up to a candle, the color of the last hour of a summer afternoon. It moved, it shifted, it breathed and pulsed and settled and breathed again, the way only firelight moves, the way nothing else in the world moves, that ancient living flicker that has drawn cold and tired creatures toward it since before there were words for warmth. The snow around the window frame had melted, in a soft halo extending perhaps a hand's width from the glass on all sides. The snow had simply given up, had let itself become water and trickled down the stone sill in small dark rivulets. The frost that coated the rest of the lane did not touch the window's immediate surround. The warmth inside was that present, that insistent, that undeniable. The traveler moved toward it, not quickly. There was something about the scene, the soft amber light, the melted halo, the scent of yeast and cinnamon still drifting, thickening now as each step forward brought more of it. That made hurrying feel wrong. This was not a moment to be rushed. This was a moment to be moved through slowly, the way you move through the last few pages of a story you don't want to end. There was a door, heavy, dark wood, old and dense, with iron fittings that had gone from black to a deep brownish gray through years of handling. A door that had known thousands of hands, thousands of cold evenings, thousands of moments just like this one. A door that knew its purpose, a door that waited. The traveler's hand found the iron handle, pressed it down, and the door swung open. The bell rang, not loudly. Nothing here was loud. It was a low, round chime, a sound with weight to it, a sound that came from somewhere deep in the bell's iron throat and then settled into the air of the room like a stone settling into still water, sending ripples of resonance out in every direction before growing quiet, quieter still. But the sound of the bell was barely noticed because the warmth had arrived first. It arrived like a presence, like stepping into an embrace, like being met by something that had been waiting for you. It was not merely warm, it was sheltering. The cold of the lane, the cold that had been pressing against collar and wrist and cheekbone for longer than felt quite natural, simply stopped, ceased, was replaced entirely, in a single step across the threshold, by air that was soft and full, and alive with heat that pressed gently against the face and the back of the hands and the cold, stiffened shoulders like something tender. The traveler stood in the doorway, just stood. There are moments that the body recognizes before the mind does, moments of such simple and fundamental rightness that thought becomes briefly unnecessary. The body already knows. It has already exhaled. The shoulders have already dropped. The jaw has already unclenched. The chest has already begun to open. Slowly, the way a fist slowly uncurls when the thing it was holding is no longer needed. This was one of those moments. Behind the traveler, the door swung slowly shut. The lane, the snow, the cold, all of it was simply on the other side of a heavy door now. The night existed. Certainly, the frost was still out there, still gentle and still relentless, still laying its white certainty across the cobblestones and the window ledges and the long curved backs of the sleeping rooftops. But in here there was only warmth and the smell of bread beginning to be born and the deep, drowsy amber of the fire. Rest here a while. There is nowhere you need to be. The snow can fall as long as it likes. Part 2. The Heart of the Bakery. The room was larger than it had appeared from outside, or perhaps it only felt that way because of the warmth. The way warmth tends to expand a space, to make the walls feel generous and the ceiling feel high, to give even a modest room the quality of something vast and sheltering. Whatever the reason, the traveler stepped fully inside and found the world had quietly rearranged itself into something almost impossibly welcoming. It was a long room, low-beamed at the ceiling, where dark timber ran the width of the space in slow, even intervals, each one worn to a deep walnut color by decades of heat and wood smoke rising from below. The floor was stone, broad flags of it, pale gray, each one slightly uneven, worn smooth in the paths that feet had traveled most often. From the door to the counter, from the counter to the shelves, from the shelves to the back of the room, where the hearth and the oven held their long, patient vigil. The walls were whitewashed, or had been once. Now they were the color of old cream, warmed further by the amber light of the fire into something closer to honey. Shelves ran along the near wall, wide wooden shelves, their edges dark with age, holding loaves in various states of completion. Some were fully baked and resting, their crusts the deep, satisfying brown of something that has met heat and been made better by it. Others were pale and domed and still, swelling slowly inside their tins in the warmth, alive with the slow breath of rising yeast. Everything was quiet, not an empty quiet, not the quiet of absence. This was a full quiet, a quiet with texture and weight, the kind of quiet that exists inside a place where work is being done slowly and well, where no one is hurrying, where time has agreed to move at a different pace than it does outside. The sounds that existed were only the sounds of the room itself. A low, continuous murmur came from the back, a deep and steady voice, not human, but as familiar as one. The oven. The great brick oven that took up most of the back wall, that had been burning since long before this particular night, and would go on burning long after it. Its voice was the voice of all fires that have been tended faithfully. A low crackle, now and then a soft shift and settle as the wood adjusted itself within the chamber. And underneath everything else, a constant, barely audible exhalation of pure heat. That heat reached across the full length of the room, not in the sharp, directed way of a parlor fire, not something you had to lean toward and position yourself in front of to feel. This was radiant, pervasive, omnidirectional warmth, the kind that comes from a mass of heated brick that has been absorbing fire for hours and has itself become a source, every surface of it releasing warmth evenly and steadily into the surrounding air. It touched the backs of the travelers' hands. It found the cold, stiffened shoulders and asked them gently to release. It settled along the jaw and the forehead and the bridge of the nose like something soft being pressed there with great care. The traveler had not realized how cold they had been until this moment. It is often that way. The body endures without reporting. It simply adjusts, tightens, conserves, soldiers on, and it is only in the presence of genuine warmth that it confesses how much it has been carrying. The admission was not unpleasant. It was, in its way, a relief. A slow, spreading, deeply physical relief, beginning at the surfaces and moving inward, as though some long-held tightness in the very bones was at last being asked to let go. The air was extraordinary. Wood smoke threaded through everything. Not intrusive. The chimney drew well, and the fire was a clean one, but present, the way a kindly memory is present. Felt rather than seen. It was the smell of warmth made visible, or as close to visible as a smell could be. And then a sound. Soft, rhythmic, unhurried. From somewhere behind the long wooden counter, half in shadow and half in the amber light of a candle set close by, someone was working. A brush of some kind, moving across a flowered surface, in long, slow strokes. Back and forth, back and forth. The sound of it was almost musical. A soft, papery sweep, then a pause, then another sweep, steady as breathing, steady as the snow falling outside, steady as the fire. It was the sound of someone who had done this 10,000 times and needed to think about none of it. Someone whose hands knew the work so well that the mind had been freed entirely to go wherever it wished or to go nowhere at all. The figure straightened. He was a broad man, not tall, but solid, with the particular solidity of someone who has spent a lifetime on their feet and found it agreeable. His hair was gray at the temples. His face was open and deeply lined in the way that comes not from hardship, but from decades of expressions made freely and often, from smiling, primarily from squinting in firelight, from the gentle concentration of someone who cares about what they are doing. His apron was heavy linen, once white, now the comfortable cream of something washed and worn and washed again 100 times, dusted at the front with flour in long, irregular sweeps where his hands had passed. He looked at the traveler and he smiled. It was not the smile of surprise. It was not the smile of a man who had expected to be alone and found he was not. It was something quieter and more settled than that. The smile of someone who had been half expecting this particular arrival without quite knowing it, who found it entirely natural that a traveler should push open a bakery door in the middle of a snowy night and step inside, as though this were simply the thing that happened on such nights, as though bakeries existed precisely for this. "Cold night," he said. His voice was low, not a whisper, but close. The volume of someone accustomed to a quiet room. Someone who had no need to fill space with sound. The words came out unhurried, with a slight roughness that suggested a man who spoke carefully and meant what he said. "Very cold," the traveler agreed. There was a pause, neither party seemed troubled by it. A fire spoke into it, a small crackle, a soft settling, and the pause became simply part of the room, part of the night, part of the general unhurried rhythm of things in here. The baker set down his flour brush. He moved to the counter's edge, slowly, without urgency, the way a man moves who is entirely at home in his own space, and rested both broad hands on the wooden surface. His hands were remarkable, large and flour-dusted, the knuckles prominent, the skin warm-toned and slightly rough at the palms. Hands that had shaped 1,000 loaves, that knew the feel of dough the way a musician knows the feel of strings, not through thought, but through something deeper than thought. "Sit," he said, simply that. He nodded toward the far end of the counter, where a stool had been pulled back from the wooden block as though someone had only recently risen from it and intended to return. The seat of it was worn smooth. The traveler moved to it and sat, and the stool received the weight without complaint, solid and warm, from its long proximity to the oven. "You've come away," the baker said. It was not quite a question. "Some way," the traveler agreed. The baker nodded once, as if this confirmed something he had already known, and turned back to his work. He lifted a portion of dough from beneath a cloth, pale, smooth, pliant, and set it on the floured block with a sound that was barely a sound at all, a soft thud of something yielding gently, meeting something firm. His hands moved over it, pressing, turning, folding with a practiced ease that was almost hypnotic to watch. There was no wasted motion. Each gesture was exactly sufficient, and no more. Press, turn, fold, rest. Again, the fire crackled. Somewhere behind the oven's iron door, the wood shifted and settled, and a thread of additional warmth moved through the room like a slow sigh. The candle near the baker's work flickered and recovered and burned steadily on. The bread on the shelves rested in the amber light, pale and patient and content. The traveler felt the last of the cold leave. Not dramatically, not all at once. It went the way it had come in small increments, from the surfaces inward. The fingers first, then the wrists, then the forearms, then the shoulders, then something deeper, something behind the ribs, some last held tension at the center of things that had been there so long it had almost stopped being noticed. It softened, released, dissolved into the warm, thick air of the bakery, and was simply gone. "We'll have a loaf ready before long," the baker said, not turning from his work. His voice was even lower now, colored with something that might have been satisfaction, might have been simple ease. Nothing to do until then, but rest. The traveler said nothing. There was nothing to say. Outside, the snow continued to fall, silently, patiently, covering the lane and the rooftops, and the window ledges in its quiet white certainty, as it had been doing for hours and would go on doing still. But inside, there was only the fire and the warmth and the slow rhythmic sound of a baker's hands moving across a floured block in the amber dark. Press, turn, fold, press, turn, fold, rest. You are warm now. There is nothing required of you. Simply listen to the fire. Part 3. The cozy nook by the fire. The baker wiped his hands on his apron, a slow gesture, unhurried, thorough, the way a man moves when he is between one task and the next, and feels no particular urgency about either. The flour came away in pale smears against the heavy linen, He looked up toward the far corner of the room, then back at the traveler, and there was something in the look that was almost amused, in the gentlest possible way, as though he were about to offer something so obvious and so good that the offering itself was a small pleasure. "Come," he said. He came around the counter, moving with that same unhurried, rolling gait, the gait of a man who has never needed to rush and has long since stopped apologizing for it, and led the way toward the back of the room. The corner he moved toward was half hidden from the rest of the shop by the angle of the shelving and the slow curve of the back wall where the oven began. It was not hidden in a secretive way, more in the way that a cove is hidden from the open sea, sheltered, set apart, a place the room seemed to have kept for exactly this purpose. The chair was there. It was enormous. That was the first thing, the sheer generous scale of it. A thing built for comfort, with no apologies made and no inches spared. It was upholstered in velvet, or what had once been velvet, now worn in that particular beautiful way that velvet wears, rubbed smooth at the armrests, slightly paler at the seat and the high curved back, the pile compressed by years of use into something softer than the original. The color was difficult to name. It had been green, perhaps. Once, a deep forest green. But the firelight and the years had turned it into something warmer and less definite, the color of old moss, of deep water, of something that had always been exactly where it was and had no intention of being anywhere else. The feet of it were dark wood, turned and sturdy. The back rose high, high enough to rest a head against, high enough to feel enclosed, held, cradled on three sides. Someone, at some point, had placed a small cushion against the inner curve of that high back, a cushion of dark patterned fabric, now soft and slightly flattened in the shape of heads that had rested there before. The chair sat not 3 feet from the face of the oven. The oven itself was a wall of brick, old brick, deep red-orange, its mortar worn gray and settled between the courses, like something that had grown rather than been built. It was vast. The arch of the main chamber mouth was dark and breathing, radiating a heat so pure and even and constant that it did not feel like heat from a fire, but heat from the earth itself, as though the stone had always been this warm, as though warmth was simply what stone was made of. The baker gestured at the chair. The traveler sat, and the chair received them the way only very old, very well-used chairs receive a person, with a kind of knowing accommodation, the cushioned surfaces finding and meeting the shapes they had been shaped by years of use to meet. The back of it was warm. The armrests were warm. The very depth of the cushion seemed to absorb the traveler, slowly, gently, like something soft, closing around an object, set carefully into it. The traveler exhaled. It was not a conscious exhalation. The body made the decision without asking. A long, slow release of breath that had been half held for hours. Through the cold miles and the wind-cut lanes and the long, dark walk, and was now simply, finally, let go. It left through the chest like something released from a great height, slow and gradual and easing. And when it was done, the chest felt wider than it had before, as though room had been made inside it for something easier. The baker had moved away. He disappeared somewhere behind the curve of the shelving, and for a moment there was only the sound of him. The soft step on the stone floor, a muffled sound of cloth, a faint metallic note from somewhere, and then the particular sound of liquid being poured, a warm, dark sound. Low and steady and brief, he returned carrying a mug. It was a heavy thing, thick-walled pottery, the color of earth. Its handle broad enough for both hands if you wished. Steam rose from it in a slow, unhurried column that caught the amber light and dispersed into the warm air above. He held it out, and the traveler took it, and the mug's warmth transferred immediately to the palms and the curled fingers in the inner wrists, a warmth that was different from the oven's warmth, more personal, more direct, like something given rather than simply present. The smell reached upward, chamomile first, soft, familiar, carrying the memory of meadows and long summer light, and something deeply, primally restful. Beneath it, honey, real honey, stirred in generously, giving the steam a sweetness that was almost visible, and woven through both, so gently it was felt rather than identified. The faintest ghost of something spiced, not sharp, not insistent, just a warmth within the warmth, a depth beneath the depth, like a low note beneath a melody. The traveler wrapped both hands around the mug. The baker said nothing, simply moved away again, back toward his counter, back toward the dough, back toward the patient rhythmic work that the night required of him. The sound of him returned a moment later. The soft brush of flour on wood, unhurried, steady, the sound of a man entirely content with where he was and what he was doing, making no demands of the room, asking nothing of it except to remain exactly as it was. Then the blanket. The baker came once more from behind the shelves, this time carrying something folded over one arm, something thick and slightly rough textured and dark colored in the amber light. Wool. Dense, tightly woven wool, heavy enough to have substance in the hand. Heavy enough that when the baker shook it open and settled it across the traveler's shoulders, it arrived with a weight that was immediate and intentional. A weight that pressed down across the upper back and the shoulder blades and the back of the arms, like a second pair of hands placed there with great gentleness. There, the baker said, just that. The traveler pulled the blanket forward with one hand, the mug held in the other, and drew it closed across the front. And the heat that had been gathering in the chair and the room and the very stones of the oven was now also trapped, held close, contained in the small warm pocket of air between the wool and the body. The cold had been retreating for some time, but this was the moment it finally conceded entirely. It did not go dramatically. It went the way the last light of evening goes, gradually and then completely, and in a way that was so smooth and so complete that it was difficult afterward to say exactly when the transition had occurred. One moment the cold was still present somewhere in the deep places, in the marrow, in the long bones of the legs, in the back of the neck where the wind had found it easiest to enter. And then it was simply not. The warmth had moved through those places, had moved with the unhurried confidence of something that knows it will win, and the cold had dissolved into it and was gone. The traveler felt it in layers. The hands first wrapped around the warm mug, the feeling returning to the fingertips in a slow tide, a soft tingling that was not quite sensation and not quite the absence of it, something in between, something on the gentle border between numb and alive. Then the forearms, the shoulders, the chest, a deep releasing of whatever the muscles had been holding, whatever braced and contracted arrangements they had made with the cold, all of it softening now, easing, sinking downward into the deep cushioned chair like something heavy put carefully to rest. The legs last, Always the legs last, after a long cold walk, the thighs especially, the long muscles of them that had been working for hours and were now asked to do nothing, nothing at all, only to exist in the warmth and to let go. They did. Slowly. The tiredness in them was not unpleasant. It was the tiredness of something used well, something that had carried its load faithfully and was now being thanked. The mug was warm against the palms. The traveler lifted it slowly with both hands and drank. The first sip moved down the throat in a warm line, honey sweet and soft, and the chamomile opened somewhere in the chest, some quality of it, some old botanical quiet that the body recognized without knowing why, the way the body sometimes recognizes things that happened before memory. The warmth of the liquid joined the warmth of the room and the warmth of the blanket, and they became indistinguishable from one another. All of it one continuous warmth. All of it surrounding and pervading and holding. The oven breathed. That was the only word for it. Breathed. The heat moved from it in slow, heavy waves, not pulsing quickly but rolling, the way deep water rolls, the way the tide moves, large, slow movements of warm air that reached the chair and the traveler in it and pressed gently, pressed and receded, and pressed again. Each wave arrived like a hand laid flat and warm against the face and held there briefly, and when it receded, it took something with it, some small remaining tension, some last held fragment of the cold night, and when the next wave came, there was less to take, and less and less. The eyelids grew heavy, not all at once. The weight came gradually, the way all the best things come, in increments too small to resist, each one reasonable on its own, accumulating without announcement into something large and gentle and irresistible. The amber light of the fire blurred softly at the edges. The sound of the baker's hands on the floured block moved further away, or seemed to, not disappearing, but becoming more like something dreamed than something heard, still present, still steady, still the faithful heartbeat of the room. The mug rested against the chest. Both hands still held it, but loosely now, cradling rather than gripping, the warmth passing between the pottery and the palms in a slow, undemanding exchange. The blanket was very heavy, not uncomfortably so, heavily in the way of something that wants to help, that is pressing down not to constrain, but to reassure, to say, you are here, you are held. There is no need to hold yourself. The wool was slightly rough against the chin where it had been drawn up, and that small roughness was itself a comfort, a texture, a realness, evidence of the solidity of the world just at the moment when the world was beginning very gently to become less solid. The fire crackled once, a single, soft note like a word spoken in a language that had no other words, only that one, and that one was enough. The traveler's eyes closed, not with effort, not with decision, simply closed. The way a flower closes in the evening, not because it must, not from duty or exhaustion, but because the light has changed and the time for opening has passed, and there is nothing left to do now but rest, quietly and completely. Inside the warmth, the baker worked on. Press, turn, fold. The oven breathed. The snow fell on the lane outside, soft and silent and endlessly patient, covering the world in white. Let the warmth hold you now. Your hands are warm. Your shoulders are still. There is nothing here that needs you to be awake. Impersonal gentleness. The traveler undressed slowly, folded things that were foldable, set things aside, and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. The room held its warmth differently up here than downstairs. Not the warmth of an active fire, but the stored warmth of a space that had been heated gradually all day. Absorbed into the plaster and the wood and the heavy blankets themselves, a warmth that was now simply the property of the room, independent of any source, patient and thorough. The traveler could smell cedarwood. It was faint, more a presence than a scent, the way the distant sea is present in a coastal town even when you cannot see it. It came from somewhere, a sachet tucked into the wardrobe perhaps, or from the wardrobe's wood itself, cedar lined against moths, the wood's oils slow releasing into the room over many years. Beneath the cedar was the paper smell that permeated the entire building, softer here than downstairs, filtered through the floorboards, but unmistakable. And beneath that, fainter still, old books. A small shelf beside the window held perhaps a dozen volumes, their spines too dim to read by lamplight, and they were breathing their slow breath into the room, as books do when left in warm, quiet spaces, giving off that particular dry sweetness that is one of the most comforting scents the world has produced. From below, through the floorboards, came a sound. It was the postmaster, still working. The sound arrived muffled and rhythmic, a soft, repeated thud, very regular, with the quality of something certain and deliberate. The rubber stamp, the traveler thought, or the brass postmark. The postmaster stamping letters at his counter one by one, working through the evening's last tasks with the same unhurried attention he brought to everything. Thud. A pause. Thud. A pause. It was a sound like a heartbeat, slower than a heartbeat and more deliberate, but with that same quality of reliable repetition, of a rhythm that would continue whether or not you were listening. The traveler lay down. The blankets received the body with the gradual warmth of something patient. The pillow was cool at first, against the cheek, and then warm. The weight of the wool blanket settled across the chest and the arms and the legs, slowly, the way water fills a vessel, finding every contour, until the whole body was held. From below, thud. A pause. Thud. The moon moved its rectangle of silver light slowly across the floorboards. The dust motes drifted in their column of cooled air beside the window. The cedarwood breathed. The old books breathed. The village outside lay in its mist, its rooftops soft, its chimneys still. The traveler's eyes were open, and then they were less open, and then they were the kind of open that is almost closed, the kind of open that the world behind them sees only in blurs and impressions, the warm yellow of the oil lamp, the silver of the moonlight, the dark shapes of the framed stamps and maps on the walls. Thud. A pause. The clock downstairs ticked, barely audible, its tick a ghost of itself by the time it reached up through the wooden floor and into the dark and the warmth of the room under the eaves. Tick. Thud. Tick. Tick. The traveler's breath had long since found its slow, even rhythm. The chest rose. The chest fell. The blankets moved with it a fraction of an inch and settled again. The room breathed with the traveler, or the traveler breathed with the room. It was by now impossible to say which was which. The lamp burned on for a while. Then it was less bright. Then it was the lamp itself that was dreaming, its flame low and steady, a small warm point in the dark of the room, surrounded by the dark and the quiet and the sound of the postmark stamp below, and the ticking of the clock, and the whispering of the gate, and the silver drift of dust in moonlight. All of it growing fainter now, all of it growing softer, all of it receding gently, the way the sound of hooves on cobblestone had receded into the mist on the traveler's arrival. Slower, 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 until there was only the warmth, and then only the dark. And then not even that. Is your mind racing tonight? Step out of the cold, misty rain and leave the heavy world at the door. Welcome to the Midnight Apothecary. Take a slow, deep breath. Fill your lungs with the comforting scent of dried lavender, sweet chamomile, and melting beeswax. Listen to the gentle rhythm of the mortar and pestle, the soft clink of amber glass, and the fire crackling in the hearth. You have nowhere else to be. You are completely safe here. Just close your eyes and let the healing begin. The Midnight Apothecary, Part 1. Arrival in the fog. The night was very still. Not the sharp stillness of winter, with its rigid silence and brittle cold, but the soft, muffled quiet of a fog-wrapped evening, where the world seemed to have drawn a thick wool blanket about its shoulders and settled in to breathe slowly. The cobblestones beneath the traveler's boots were slick and dark, each one glistening faintly with the moisture that rolled in from the river, and every footstep landed with a low, soft sound, a gentle tap, 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 absorbed almost at once by the heavy air. The street was old. You could feel it in the way the stones curved slightly inward, worn smooth by a century of footsteps, by cartwheel and horse and hurrying heel. The buildings on either side rose quietly into the mist, their upper windows dark, their chimneys breathing pale threads of wood smoke that dissolved before they could climb very high. The gas lamps that stood at the corners burned low and amber, their light barely reaching the ground, modest little suns, keeping only small promises. The traveler moved slowly. There was no particular urgency now. The hour was very late, and the city had retired around them, and there was something in the cool, damp air that asked, gently but firmly, for unhurried things. Each breath carried the green, medicinal sweetness of eucalyptus from somewhere nearby, a scent clean and ancient, like something distilled from a forest floor after rain. It mingled with the wood smoke in a way that was deeply comforting, the way a familiar room smells when you return to it after a long while away. The traveler paused. Just ahead, where the lane curved gently to the left and the fog thickened into something almost solid, there was light. Not the cold blue-white of a lamp left carelessly burning, but something warmer, something amber and deep, the color of honey held up to a candle flame. It came from a single shop window, low and wide, and it fell across the wet cobblestones in a long, rippling rectangle, as though the street itself were very slightly gilded. The traveler drew closer. Above the door, suspended on two small iron hooks, hung a wooden sign. Its edges were softened with age, and the paint that had once been bright was now a warm, faded thing. A mortar and pestle rendered in the old style, surrounded by the fine ghost of lettering that the years had worn nearly away. The sign swayed in the faintest of breezes, barely a breath, creaking once in a sound so small it might have been imagined. An apothecary, open impossibly at this hour. The window itself was a wonder of small things. Arranged on a low shelf behind the glass were bottles of amber and green and deep cobalt, some tall and slender, some round and stoppered with cork, some no larger than a thumb. Each one held something: a dried flower, an oil that caught the light, a powder in shades of rust and cream and pale gray. Between them, a small brass scale sat perfectly balanced, its two pans resting motionless. A sprig of something dark and aromatic was tucked along the frame. The whole arrangement had the feeling of a still life painted by someone who understood that beauty could be quiet. The traveler placed a hand on the door. The wood was heavy, solid, worn smooth at the handle from years of use, and it swung inward without resistance, as though it had been expecting exactly this. A small brass bell above the door gave a single soft chime. Not a sharp ring, nothing so abrupt, but a clean, round note that rose for a moment and then settled into the warm air like a stone, dropped into still water. The sound of it seemed to linger a little, touching the far corners of the room before fading into a silence that felt, somehow, more complete than the silence outside. The traveler stood just inside the threshold and breathed. The room smelled of a dozen things at once, and yet none of them competed. There was dried lavender and something resinous, amber or pine, and beneath it all, a sweetness like vanilla and old wood and the faintest trace of beeswax candles. The air was warmer here, noticeably so, with the particular warmth of a room that had held its heat all evening through careful tending. A small wood stove in the far corner ticked softly as it settled, its iron belly glowing the faintest orange behind a grill. The walls were extraordinary. Floor to ceiling, from one end of the room to the other, they were covered in small wooden drawers, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, each one fitted with a small brass pull and a tiny card in a neat slot, handwritten in ink that had faded to the color of weak tea. Above the drawers, on shelves that had been built into every available inch of space, stood more bottles, amber glass in every size and proportion, their contents dark and soft and luminous in the low light, as though each one held a little piece of a sunset. Some were sealed with wax, some with cork, some with stoppers, ground to a perfect fit. The shelves climbed so high that a narrow rolling ladder on a brass rail had been installed to reach the topmost ones, and it rested now near the window, patient and still. The floorboards underfoot were dark with age, and they did not creak. The ceiling was low and beamed, hung in one corner with bundles of drying herbs, rosemary, chamomile, something with pale purple flowers that swayed imperceptibly in the warmth rising from the stove. On the wide wooden counter that ran along one side of the room, a set of brass scales, larger than the ones in the window, sat beside a marble mortar. A single candle burned in a glass chimney nearby, its flame so steady it might have been painted. Behind the counter stood a woman. She had not looked up when the bell sounded, or rather, she had looked up in the way of someone who is not startled by arrivals, who expects the world to come and go at its own pace. She wore a dress of dark velvet, deep as a winter plum, with long sleeves and small buttons at the wrist, and her dark hair was gathered loosely at the nape of her neck, a few strands falling forward as she worked. Before her on the counter lay a wide, shallow basket of dried chamomile, pale gold heads of it, softly fragrant, and she was sorting it with the unhurried care of someone for whom this task was not a chore, but a kind of meditation. Her fingers moved slowly, precisely, turning each bloom and setting it to one side. She looked up. Her eyes were calm, the particular calm of someone who has spent many years in quiet rooms, who has learned to listen before speaking, who has never had cause to be in a hurry. She was not young and not old, and her face held the sort of expression that is sometimes called serenity and sometimes called wisdom, and is usually both. "Come in," she said. "You look as though you have walked a long way." Her voice was low and measured, unhurried as the rest of her. It had the quality of a room after rain, clean and settled, with nothing left sharp in it. The traveler stepped further inside, and the door swung quietly closed behind them. The fog remained outside. In here there was only warmth and lamplight, and the faint, sweet smell of chamomile, and the soft tick of the stove cooling from its evening work. "I wasn't certain you'd be open," the traveler said. The apothecary smiled. A small, genuine thing, unhurried as everything else about her. She set down the flower she had been turning between her fingers and folded her hands together on the counter. "I am always open," she said simply, "for those who find their way here." She gestured with one graceful hand to the low wooden stool on the visitor's side of the counter, as though it had been placed there for precisely this occasion, at precisely this hour. "Sit," she said softly. "There is no hurry. The night is long and quiet and very kind." The traveler sat. The stool was smooth and solid. The warmth of the room settled around the shoulders like something draped with care. Outside, the fog pressed gently against the window glass, and the amber bottles on the shelves caught the candlelight, and the chamomile breathed its soft, ancient sweetness into the still air. The apothecary reached for the basket again and resumed her slow, careful work. "Tell me," she said quietly without looking up, "what is it that you need tonight?" Above the door, a sign hung from a short iron bracket, swinging very gently in the evening air. The sign was wooden, old wood, painted and repainted many times over, so that the layers showed at the edges, and upon it, in careful gold lettering that had faded just enough to feel entirely right, were the words Whispering Gate Post Office, and below that, Est, 1847. The sign swung. It made no sound. The traveler stood for a moment on the cobblestones, looking at the door. It was a good door, a proper door, with a brass handle worn smooth by generations of hands, and a small window in its upper half through which the amber light fell in a warm rectangle onto the step outside. The step itself was stone, slightly hollowed in the center from long use, and that hollow seemed to the traveler perhaps fanciful, perhaps not, like a kind of welcome, like the place where welcome lives, worn into the world by repetition. A breath, a step forward. The door opened with a sound that was barely a sound at all, just the soft compression of warm air against cool, the faint whisper of old hinges, the quietest possible announcement of an arrival. Inside, the world changed. It changed slowly, the way warmth changes things. Gradually, from the outside in, the cold of the evening fell away first from the face, then from the hands, then from the chest, until the whole body had adjusted and settled into the ambient warmth of the room the way a stone settles into riverbed. The room was not large, but it was full. Floor to ceiling on the left-hand wall ran wooden pigeonholes, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, arranged in a grid so precise and yet so gently aged that they seemed to have grown there rather than been constructed. Each pigeonhole was a small dark square of shadow, and in each shadow, nested letters, folded paper and sealed envelopes, fat parcels and thin notes, everything waiting with the particular patience of correspondence. On the right, shelves bore their own orderly burdens. Leather-bound books with labels on their spines, stacks of brown parcel paper tied with twine, brass instruments of measurement and impression, bottles of ink in dark glass, a set of scales, a rack of rubber stamps, everything in its place, everything tended. The scent of the room was extraordinary. It was the smell of old paper, not musty, not stale, but rich and dry, the way antique bookshops smell, the way the inside of a cedar chest smells, with something deeper beneath it, leather, much used and well-conditioned, wood smoke from the small fireplace in the corner, where a fire had been going long enough to have settled into contentment, and something else, fainter. That might have been wax, or might have been ink, or might simply have been the accumulated history of 1,000 letters passing through this room. Over more than a century, the traveler breathed it in. Behind the long wooden counter, bent over a stack of envelopes, arranged in careful rows, was a man. He was elderly, not frail, but properly old, the kind of old that carries its weight easily, that has learned over many decades not to hurry and has found that unhurrying suits it well. He wore a woolen vest over a white shirt, the vest a rich navy with small buttons that caught the lamplight. His spectacles sat slightly low on his nose, not slipping, but settled there as if they had found their position long ago and saw no reason to move. His hair was white and combed, his hands steady and precise over the envelopes. He was sorting. Not quickly. There was no speed in what he did, only accuracy. He would take an envelope from the stack, hold it a moment, read the address with the attention of someone who genuinely cared where it was going, and then place it with soft finality into the correct pigeonhole behind him. The sound this made, the dry whisper of paper against wood, was repeated every few seconds, steadily, like the clicking of the clock on the mantelpiece. Above the fire, he looked up. His eyes behind the spectacles were a warm gray blue, the color of the sky on a morning when the weather cannot quite decide. They carried without effort the unmistakable expression of a person who is genuinely glad to see another person. "Ah," he said, "just that," quietly, as if the traveler's arrival had been not unexpected, not exactly, but simply right, as if the evening had been waiting for this moment and was now settling into its proper shape. "You'll have come a long way," he said. It was not quite a question. "I have," said the traveler. The postmaster nodded, the way people nod when a thing confirms what they already suspected, and set down his envelope with the same careful deliberateness with which he had been handling all the others. "Well," he said, "you're here now." And somewhere in the warmth of that small room, in the amber light and the scent of old paper and the soft ticking of the clock and the muffled whispering of the ancient trees outside, the traveler felt, with a certainty as quiet and complete as the village itself, that this was entirely true. Here, and arrived, and safe. Outside, the mist deepened. The village of Whispering Gate settled into the long, gentle dark of a perfect evening, and the fire in the corner of the post office crackled once, softly, and burned on. Part 2. Inside the old post office, the postmaster moved the way water moves through a calm place, not slowly exactly, but without any of the small urgencies that most movement carries. No sharp turns, no sudden reaches, every gesture completed before the next one began, as if each motion were a sentence that deserved its own full stop before the next was started. He came around from behind the counter with a quietness that the old floorboards accommodated entirely. They did not creak beneath him, or if they did, it was a creak so familiar and so expected that it had long since become part of the room's natural breath, as unremarkable as the ticking of the clock or the low voice of the fire. "Come in properly," he said. "Close the door behind you. The village air is lovely, but it has a way of following you in if you let it linger." The traveler closed the door. The latch settled into its housing with a sound like a word said quietly at the end of a long sentence, a sound of completion, of closure, of there. The room was even warmer now that the door was shut. The warmth was not the aggressive warmth of a room overheated, but the patient warmth of a space that had been tended carefully over many hours, built up gradually from the fireplace in the corner until it had reached this precise enveloping temperature, the temperature the traveler thought of a room that has been lived in with intention. The shelves, seen properly now, were extraordinary. They ran from floor to ceiling along the back wall and the wall to the right of the door, broken only by the counter and the fireplace, and two narrow windows whose glass had the old slightly wavy quality that made the lamplight inside look liquid. The shelves were oak, dark oak, aged to the color of strong tea, and upon them, in an order that was immediately legible even if its exact logic was not, rested the accumulated correspondence and materials of a very long operation. Fat parcels wrapped in brown paper sat beside slim envelopes tied in bundles with cotton twine, the knots simple and precise. There were rolls of fresh brown paper stacked upright in a wooden bin at the base of one shelf, and beside them, coils of twine on wooden spools, each spool the same neat diameter. Books stood in rows, leather-bound ledgers, mostly, their spines labeled in careful handwriting, each label protected by a small rectangle of varnish. Between the books, objects, a letter opener with a handle of polished bone, a small brass magnifying glass on a stand, an ink bottle, sealed its contents the dark blue-black of a winter sky, and letters. Letters everywhere, in their pigeonholes and on their shelves, and tucked into the gaps between things, patient and still, carrying within them all their invisible weight of meaning. The traveler looked at all of it and felt something settle inside. The way things settle when a place is so completely itself that it requires nothing from you in return. You could simply stand here and exist, and the room would go on being exactly what it was, and that would be entirely sufficient. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked. It was a mantel clock of the proper Victorian sort. Dark wood case with brass fittings, a white enamel face with Roman numerals, hands of blued steel. The tick it made was neither loud nor soft, but precisely what a tick ought to be. A clean, dry click, followed by the briefest of silences, followed by another clean, dry click. There was no variation in it, no hesitation, no hurry. Tick, tick, tick. The traveler became aware of having been listening to it for some time without noticing. It had a quality that certain sounds have, a quality of dissolving into the background and simultaneously becoming the background, so that eventually the rhythm of it becomes the rhythm of the room. And then, if you are not careful, the rhythm of your own breathing. The fire in the corner crackled softly, not a dramatic crackling, no sparks, no sudden shifts, but the low, continuous small conversation of burning wood that has settled into its task and intends to continue with it indefinitely. The logs were beech and apple wood, the postmaster would later mention, because applewood burned slow and sweet and left an ash that was almost white, clean and fine as powder. The light from the fire moved across the brass weighing scale on the counter. The scale was beautiful. It was the kind of scale found in very old post offices and apothecaries. A balance beam on a central post with 2 hanging pans of polished brass suspended on fine chains. It had been cleaned recently, or perhaps it was cleaned every evening as a matter of course, because the brass had that deep, warm glow that speaks of regular attention rather than occasional polish. The firelight moved across its surface in slow, liquid shifts, and the scale, if you watched it long enough, seemed to be breathing, the pans swaying almost imperceptibly with the air currents of the room, finding their balance again and again in small, peaceful adjustments. "Earl Grey, I think," said the postmaster, as if concluding a deliberation he had been conducting privately. "Unless you'd prefer something with apple in it. I have a cider on the hob that's been warming since before dark." "The cider?" said the traveler, without quite meaning to decide. The postmaster made a sound of quiet approval and moved toward a small annex at the back of the room. Not a separate room exactly, more a deepening of the space where a small iron stove sat on a tiled hearth, and a collection of copper and tin vessels lived on hooks and on a shelf of their own. The traveler could see from the counter the soft orange glow of the stove's vent. The sounds that came from that corner were extraordinary in their smallness and their clarity. The soft, resonant clink of a ladle against the inside of a copper pot, the low, sibilant hiss of liquid near boiling that had been reduced to a patient simmer, the thin, bright sound of porcelain cups being set on a wooden surface, not careless, but confident, the sound of hands that knew exactly how much pressure was required, the soft percussion of the cupboard door closing, a drawer opening and closing again, the small crystalline sound of a spoon. Each sound arrived in the room complete and separate, like notes in a piece of music written for a very slow tempo. Largo, or slower even than that, a tempo with no name because it had never needed one before. The traveler sat on a low wooden stool near the counter. It was the right height. Everything in the room, it seemed, was the right height, the right weight, the right temperature. The postmaster returned with 2 cups on a small tray and a plate on which sat 3 thin biscuits with a faint pattern pressed into their surface. A leaf, or possibly a postmark. It was difficult to tell in the amber light, and it did not matter. The cider was in a cup of white porcelain, slightly wide at the mouth, the kind of cup that releases scent generously. The traveler took it in both hands. The scent rose slowly. It was warm apple, not sharp, not sweet, but the deep, round warmth of apples that have been left to mature and then heated gently for a long time with something fragrant added. A cinnamon stick, perhaps, and a few cloves, and what might have been a strip of dried orange peel. Beneath the apple was something darker, almost smoky. The cider itself, its fermentation present but gentle, a reminder of autumn pressed into liquid. The first sip was warm all the way down. The postmaster settled into his chair behind the counter with his own cup. Earl Grey. The bergamot lifting faintly into the air and mixing with the apple and the wood smoke into something that had no name but felt, to the traveler, like the olfactory equivalent of being told that everything was going to be fine. For a while, neither of them spoke. This was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of a room that has enough in it already, enough warmth, enough light, enough small sound. That silence between two people becomes simply another comfortable element of the whole. The postmaster sipped his tea. The traveler sipped the cider. The clock ticked. The fire crackled. Outside, somewhere distant, the wind moved through the iron gate and made its soft, continuous music. When the conversation came, it came gently, the way sleep comes when you are not fighting it. "Far?" asked the postmaster. "Far enough," said the traveler. The postmaster nodded. He picked up an envelope from the small stack beside him. He could not, it seemed, be entirely without letters, and turned it in his hands, not reading it, just turning it, as a person might turn a smooth stone. "The roads are long this time of year," he said. "The mist comes early, but it's a soft mist. It doesn't cut. You'll have noticed." "I did notice," said the traveler. "It felt more like a presence than a weather." The postmaster looked pleased at this. Not surprised. The expression was more that of a man who has always known something to be true and is glad to hear someone else arrive at it independently. "That's exactly right," he said. "That's exactly what it is." He set the envelope down with care and took another sip of his tea. The scents in the room shifted as the evening deepened. The wood smoke thickened slightly as the fire was fed. A new log, added without ceremony, pressing the flames briefly lower before they found the fresh fuel and rose again. With the new wood came the sweetness of apple wood sap, a faint, sticky sweetness that was not quite food and not quite forest, but something between them. The dried ink on the letters on the counter had its own presence, a faint mineral sharpness, very faint, the ghost of iron gall and carbon black, the smell of intention dried into permanence. And beneath all of it, continuously, the old paper smell of the room itself. The traveler had stopped noticing it the way you stopped noticing the sound of a river once you have lived beside it long enough. And yet it was there, always, the way the river is always there. Not intrusive, simply true. The postmaster refilled the traveler's cup without being asked, rising and returning so quietly that the moment seemed to happen between moments. "There's no hurry," he said, settling back. "There never is. Here." The traveler looked at the pigeonholes, at the hundreds of small dark squares each cradling its quiet cargo of words. Looked at the fire, at the clock, at the amber light pooling on the wooden counter and the polished brass of the scale and the white porcelain of the cup. "No," agreed the traveler. "There isn't." The clock ticked on. Each tick was the same as the last. Each tick was the same as the next. The fire breathed. The lamplight stayed warm and steady. Somewhere outside, a very faint wind moved through the trees, and the trees whispered back, and their whispering reached the room as something even softer than a sound, more like the memory of a sound, felt rather than heard, the way you feel the presence of water before you see it. The cider cooled to the temperature of a warm room and was perfect. The biscuits were eaten slowly, one each, the third left on the plate because leaving the third on the plate seemed right. The conversation, when it came in small pieces, unhurried, with long and comfortable silences between them. Silences that grew longer as the evening progressed, as the warmth of the room and the warmth of the cider and the warmth of the company settled deeper and deeper into the bones, into the muscles, into the chest, into the breath itself, until breathing felt like something that was happening to the traveler rather than something the traveler was doing. Slow and even and quiet, in and out in the amber lamplight, while the fire crackled and the clock ticked, and the letters rested in their pigeonholes, and the old post office of Whispering Gate held everything warmly in the palm of its ancient, patient hand. The postmaster sipped his tea. The traveler closed their eyes for just a moment. Just a moment. Part 3. The guest room above the sorting floor. The postmaster set down his cup. He did it the way he did everything, without announcement, without abruptness, simply completing the gesture and allowing what came next to follow naturally, the way one breath follows another. He rose from his chair, which made the quietest possible sound of old wood accepting and then releasing weight, and he moved to a narrow door set into the back wall of the post office that the traveler had not noticed before. It was not hidden. It was simply the kind of door that does not draw attention to itself. Dark wood, flush with the paneling, a small brass handle at exactly the right height for a hand that knew where to reach. The postmaster opened it and held it, turning to look at the traveler with an expression of such uncomplicated kindness that no words were required. "The room upstairs," he said, because words, while not required, were offered anyway. "It's been aired. There are blankets enough." The staircase beyond the door was narrow and straight, with a wooden banister worn glassy smooth on its upper face by the accumulated passage of many hands. The stairs themselves were dark wood, each one slightly different in height from the last, in the way of very old staircases, built by someone who understood that a staircase should be climbed with attention. That attention slows a person, and that slowing is nearly always good. The traveler climbed. Each step had its own voice, not a loud voice, a low, domestic creak, personal to that particular board, the kind of sound that would have been entirely familiar to anyone who had lived in this building for more than a week. Third step, a long, low moan, very soft. Sixth step, a brief, bright complaint, quickly resolved. Ninth step, silence, solid and dense as stone. Part 2. Inside the quilt maker's workshop, the chair holds you like something that has been waiting. It is low and wide and upholstered in a fabric the color of old moss. Thick, slightly worn at the arms, the cushion shaped by years of use into something that fits the body perfectly, welcomingly, as though it were made not for anyone in particular, but for anyone who needed, at the end of a long day, simply to sit down and stop. You settle into it, and it settles around you, and the fire before you breathes its quiet, orange breath. And for a moment, you do nothing at all except exist in the warmth. The room arranges itself slowly around you, the way rooms do when you are truly still in them, when you are not moving through them or searching them for something, but simply in them, receiving. The workshop is not large, but it is full, not crowded, not cluttered, full in the way that a life well lived is full. Every inch of it occupied by something that belongs there, something with a history and a purpose. Nothing superfluous, nothing accidentally arrived. The stone walls are thick and old, the kind of walls that hold warmth the way cupped hands hold water. Carefully, completely. The ceiling is low, crossed with dark wooden beams, and from one of them hangs a small bunch of dried lavender, its color faded now to the softest gray purple, its scent still faintly present in the warm air. Along the far wall run the work tables. There are 2 of them, long and broad, their surfaces of smoothed old oak worn pale, in the places where hands and fabric have passed most often, and upon them rest the materials of the craft in a state of beautiful, particular order. Bolts of fabric are stacked at one end, velvet the color of midnight, and forest and deep burgundy. Flannel in softer tones of gray and oat and dusty rose. Silk in lengths that catch the firelight and throw it back in slow, rippling shifts of gold and cream. Each bolt is neatly rolled, neatly stacked, the edges aligned with quiet care. Beside the bolts, the baskets. There are 4 of them at least, large and wide and overflowing with fabric scraps. Pieces of every size and color, some no larger than a playing card, others long, irregular strips, all of them sorted loosely, tumbled together in the baskets in a way that is not quite orderly, but is somehow still pleasing. A harvest of color and texture gathered from 100 different projects. You can see, from where you sit, a scrap of deep green velvet, a torn triangle of yellow cotton printed with small blue flowers, a length of cream silk ribbon coiled loosely on top, and beneath it all, buried almost out of sight, a piece of something red and woolen that might once have been a child's winter coat. The spools of thread stand in rows along a narrow shelf above the nearer table. There are many of them, dozens, perhaps, each one wound with its own particular color, and in the firelight they form a long, glowing sequence of hues that is almost like a painting. The deep navies and forest greens at one end, moving through teals and sage and the warm gray of early morning sky, into the yellows and golds and soft ambers of the middle, then on to the pinks, the roses, the faded mauves, and finally, at the far end, the creams and the whites, and one spool of the purest silver thread that catches the fire more than any of the others and holds it like a small, steady star. The quilt maker moves among all of this without haste, without drama, in the easy, practiced way of someone who has moved among these same objects every day for longer than they could easily count. They do not bump the baskets or disturb the folded cloth. They simply move, slowly, quietly, with a sureness of hand and foot that is deeply calming to watch, the way it is calming to watch a river moving in a familiar channel. From somewhere deeper in the cottage comes the small, clear sound of water being poured. You hear it clearly in the hush. The liquid sound of water filling a kettle, unhurried, the pitch rising gradually as the vessel fills, and then a soft metallic clink as the kettle is set upon the hob, and then the very faint, low sigh of heat beginning its slow work. The quilt maker returns to the workshop, drying their hands on the edge of their apron. Chamomile, they say, by way of explanation, and you nod, and that is the whole of the conversation about it. 3 syllables, entirely sufficient. They pull a second, smaller chair from beneath the nearer work table, a plain wooden chair with a cushion of faded blue tied to its seat, and place it beside your own, close to the fire, and sit down, with the slow, considered movement of someone who does not sit down carelessly, but attends to it, settling into stillness as deliberately as they settle into work. For a little while, neither of you speaks. The fire speaks for you. It crackles, a small, bright crackle, as a piece of wood shifts and releases its stored air in a tiny, quick burst, and then settles back into its low, steady conversation with itself. The sound of it is extraordinary when you attend to it closely. It is not one sound, but many, a continuous layered murmur of soft hisses and ticks and occasional deeper pops, the wood contracting and expanding and giving itself over slowly to the heat, and beneath all of that, the deeper, barely audible sound of the draw, the chimney, breathing the smoke upward into the cold dark above the cottage, patient and unhurried. The shadows move on the flagged stone floor, long, warm, amber shadows cast by the firelight, shifting gently as the flames rise and fall. They move across the floor and up the far wall and over the stacked bolts of fabric, and where they touch the silk, the light seems to sink into it and glow from within, as though the fabric itself were faintly, warmly lit. The ticking of the grandfather clock reaches you from the hallway beyond. It is steady, completely, absolutely steady. The kind of steadiness that is not merely mechanical, but feels almost intentional, almost kind. Tick, tick, tick. Low and resonant, each beat a small, contained sound that falls and is absorbed by the warm air of the room and replaced, without pause, by the next. You have heard clocks all your life, and yet this one, in this room, at this hour, seems to be doing something slightly different from what clocks usually do. It is not measuring the passage of time so much as it is anchoring it, holding the present moment open, spacious, unhurried, saying in its quiet, rhythmic way, there is no rush. There is only now. Tick, and now. Tick, and now. The kettle begins, very faintly, to sing. Not a whistle, not yet, simply the first, barely there murmur of warming water, a sound so soft you might almost imagine it, a low and gentle hum that rises by degrees as the heat builds beneath it. You listen to it without effort, without intention, the way you listen to rain, simply aware of it, simply receiving it. As it rises and fills the quiet spaces between the ticking of the clock and the breathing of the fire, the quilt maker rises. Their footsteps move to the kitchen and back. You hear the small sounds, one after another, each one quiet and distinct and deeply familiar in the way that domestic sounds always are. The chime of a teapot lid lifted, the gentle clink of a cup placed on a saucer, the soft sound of liquid poured in a slow, steady stream. Then the carrying of it, the light, careful footsteps returning, and the quilt maker is beside you again, placing the teacup gently into your hands. The cup is warm through the porcelain. Not hot, warm. Exactly, precisely warm. The warmth of something that will be kind to your hands and your throat and your chest. The tea inside is pale gold in the firelight, and from its surface rises a thin thread of steam curling slowly upward, dissipating into the warm air of the room. You bring it close and breathe before you drink. Chamomile, and beneath it, or perhaps woven through it, as threads are woven through cloth, the faintest suggestion of honey and something else, something you cannot quite name, something slightly sweet and green and ancient. You think, without quite knowing why, of open meadows in late summer, of long, slow afternoons, of drowsiness. You drink. Slowly, the scent of the room settles around you as you drink. It is the scent of lavender, that dried bunch above, releasing its quietest ghost of fragrance into the warm air, and the scent of beeswax from the candles on the mantelpiece, burning low and steady, and the deeper, older scent of the room itself, the cloth and the wooden beams, and the cold stone warmed by long years of fire. It is a scent that does not ask anything of you. It is simply present, like the warmth, like the ticking of the clock, like the amber light. a layer of comfort that you receive without effort, without decision. The quilt maker reaches into the mirror basket and draws out a long piece of navy flannel, spreading it across their lap with the quiet attention of someone examining something they know very well. This one needs finishing, they say. Not to you particularly, not requiring a reply. Simply observing. Their hands move to the small wooden workbox on the table beside them. A shallow box, its lid inlaid with a simple pattern of lighter wood, worn smooth, and lift from it a needle already threaded, laid to rest there at some earlier moment for just this purpose. They draw the needle through the fabric with the slowest, most fluid motion, pulling the thread through in one long, unhurried arc, and then back, and then through again. The sound of it is almost imperceptible. The faintest shush of thread through cloth, the tiniest whisper of resistance, and then release, over and over, in a rhythm as steady as breathing. You do not try to watch. You simply let your eyes rest on the firelight. The heavy cloth in the basket shifts faintly as the warmth from the fire stirs the air. The silk on the work table catches the light and holds it. From outside, very far away, softened almost to silence by the fog and the thick old walls, you hear the faint sound of the village settling into its evening. A door closing somewhere, a horse shifting in a stable yard, the distant sound of bells from the church tower tolling the hour in slow, resonant strokes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Each stroke fades completely before the next arrives. The silence between them is immense and soft. The quilt maker sews on, unhurried. The fire breathes. The clock ticks. The steam from your teacup rises and thins and disappears. The dried lavender above the beam releases its quiet scent into the warm air, and the beeswax candles burn without flickering. And the quilts on their shelves and their folded stacks glow softly in the amber light, each one a gathered warmth, a patient record of careful hands and slow hours, and love translated stitch by stitch into cloth. Part 1. Arrival in the Cotswolds. The coach had been rolling for a long time. You are not quite sure how long. The hours had softened and blurred somewhere past the last market town, somewhere between the turning of the wheels and the steady, lulling sway of the carriage. The countryside beyond the misted window had grown quieter, the fields flattening into gentle rolls, the hedgerows thickening with frost, and the sky above deepening from a pale, washed gray into something warmer, a slow, amber-tinged dusk settling over the hills like a heavy blanket drawn up to the chin. You let your eyes close for a moment, then open them again, and there, as if the village had simply appeared while you were not looking, is the first gentle glow of window light through the fog. The village comes to you slowly, the way all the best things do. First, only shapes, dark forms rising from the mist, the curved spines of rooftops, the soft suggestion of chimney stacks, a church tower, standing patient and still against the violet sky. Then, as the coach rounds the final bend and begins to slow, the shapes gather detail. Stone walls the color of warm honey, cobblestones slick with cold evening damp, narrow lanes between the cottages, barely wide enough for a cart, wound about with climbing ivy gone rust red with the season. The coachman says nothing. He simply draws the horses to a gentle stop, and you step down onto the cobblestones, and for a moment you only stand there, breathing. The air is cold, softly, perfectly cold, the kind of cold that is not harsh but simply present, settling around your shoulders like a shawl of clean winter air. and with it comes the scent. Wood smoke. That old, unhurried scent of wood smoke curling from a dozen chimneys at once, rich and amber dark, and utterly comforting in the way that only a few scents in the world can be. Scents that reach back past thought, past memory, past all the complexity of the waking day, and simply say, you are safe now. You are somewhere warm. You breathe it in slowly, let it settle. The village is not silent, but its sounds are soft, muffled, distant, as though the fog has laid a gentle hand over everything and hushed it to a murmur. Somewhere, not far away, the sound of carriage wheels on cobblestones, rolling slow and even, a rhythm like a quiet heartbeat. The wheels turn and turn, and their sound grows gradually fainter, rolling away down some unseen lane until it dissolves into the mist entirely. Footsteps, soft and unhurried, pass somewhere behind you. A woman with a basket, her heels a gentle tap, tap, tap on the wet stone, growing quieter, fading. A door opens somewhere, a brief swell of warmth and light, the murmur of low voices, and then closes again with a soft click, leaving only the hush. Somewhere above you, a bird settles into the eaves with a small flutter, then goes still. The village breathes slowly. You breathe with it. The amber light from the windows is the most beautiful thing. Each cottage window glows like a lantern set deep in the stone, the old mullioned glass catching the firelight within and fracturing it gently, casting long, soft-edged diamonds of gold out onto the wet cobblestones at your feet. You walk slowly, no particular hurry, your traveling bag carried easy at your side, your footsteps quiet against the stones. You pass a baker's, long since shuttered for the evening, its sign swaying faintly in the gentlest of cold breezes. You pass the post office, a single oil lamp burning in its window, the flame perfectly still. You pass an old stone wall, draped in dead wisteria, its gnarled branches silver with frost, and through a low gate you see the glimmer of a kitchen fire through a cottage window. A woman at a table, moving slowly, bent over some gentle evening task. The light everywhere is amber, warm amber and pale gold, and the soft blue-gray of the mist between them. Dusk has fully fallen now, but it is not dark the way that darkness is cold or threatening. It is dark the way thick wool is dark, the way a closed eye is dark. Simply soft, simply restful. You walk on, unhurried. And then you see the sign. It is a small sign hung on a bracket of wrought iron above a low doorway, a wooden panel painted in faded cream and carved into its surface with great patience and evident love, the image of a needle threaded with a looping length of thread. The carving is simple but very fine, the grooves worn smooth with age, and the sign hangs with a gentle, barely there sway, turning just slightly in the cool air before settling again. Beneath the needle and thread, in small, careful lettering, the words, "The Quilt Maker." You stop. Through the window, low, wide, the old glass uneven and full of soft distortions. You can see them. The quilts. They are folded in neat, beautiful stacks along the deep sill and on a long wooden shelf behind it. And even through the frost-hazed glass and the amber warmth of the interior light, their colors are extraordinary. Deep blues and soft greens, and the rich red of old roses, and a cream so warm it is almost gold. Patchwork patterns, tiny pieces fitted together with such care, such patient precision, catch the firelight and glow. And then, from somewhere in the back, from behind a curtain of pale linen that hung in the doorway beyond the counter, came the soft sound of movement, unhurried, deliberate. The sound of someone who had never found reason to move quickly through a room. She appeared a moment later, drawing the curtain aside with one hand, a small pair of cutting shears held loosely in the other. She was elderly and small, with white hair pinned softly at the back of her head. She wore a long apron over a dark dress, the apron's pockets full of some small tools of her trade, and her hands, which she wiped now on the apron's hem as she looked up, were the hands of someone who had worked gently and carefully with growing things for a very long time. There was soil beneath her fingernails. She did not seem troubled by this. Her eyes found you without surprise. They were very calm eyes. Gray or blue, in the warm lamplight it was difficult to say, and they held in them the particular quality of someone who is genuinely, quietly glad to see you. Not with excitement, not with the bright energy of someone who has been waiting eagerly, but with the deeper, softer gladness of someone who has simply always expected you would come, eventually, and is pleased to have been right. "Good evening," she said. Her voice was quiet, not a whisper, but close. The kind of voice that belongs in rooms like this. In evenings like this. The kind of voice that does not need to be loud because everything it says is worth listening carefully for. "You found us," she said, and set the shears down on the counter with a faint, soft click. She said it not as a question and not quite as a statement, more as a gentle acknowledgement of something both of you already understood. You told her that you had been walking, and that the scent of the flowers had reached you from the street, and that you had found yourself stopping before you had quite decided to. She nodded slowly, as though this made complete and perfect sense. "That is generally how it happens," she said. "The flowers let people know when to come." She moved behind the counter with the same unhurried ease with which she had entered the room, straightening a jar here, adjusting the stem of a rose there. And then she looked up again and considered you for a moment with those calm, kind eyes. "You look," she said gently, "like someone who could do with sitting quietly for a little while." There was no judgment in it, no observation that required defending against. It was simply true. "There is a chair by the window," she said, nodding toward it. A small armchair, its cushion the color of moss, positioned beside the display so that you might look out at the lamplit lane. And I was about to make tea. She did not wait for an answer. She simply drew the curtain aside and disappeared back into the room beyond, and the soft sounds of her moving about in there. A kettle being lifted, the quiet tap of a cup set on a saucer, filled the shop with the most ordinary and the most comforting music in the world. You sat in the chair by the window. Outside, the lane was still. A gas lamp burned. The wooden sign swayed. And the flowers in the window beside you released their scent in slow, gentle waves into the warm and quiet air. You were, at last, exactly where you needed to be. Part 2. Inside the flower shop. The chair was softer than it looked. That was the first thing you noticed. Once you had settled into it, the way it received you, the cushion, giving just enough, the arm rests worn to the particular smoothness that only comes from years of use, and the slow, patient work of hands resting there in quieter moments. It was the kind of chair that had been sat in by many people over many years and had learned, somewhere along the way, how to hold a person gently. You let your coat fall open. You let your hands rest. From behind the pale linen curtain came the small domestic music of the shopkeeper moving about her back room, the low murmur of water beginning to warm, the soft knock of a wooden drawer being opened and closed, the rustle of something dried and papery being handled with care. These sounds reached you not as intrusions, but as reassurances, evidence that the world was continuing in its gentle way, that someone nearby was busy with quiet and useful things, and that nothing was required of you for the moment but to be still. So you were still, and in the stillness, the shop came to you. It was the kind of room that revealed itself slowly. You had taken it in all at once when you first entered, the warmth, the scent, the golden light, but now, settled and unhurried, you began to see its particulars. The way the light moved, for instance. There were 2 oil lamps mounted on the walls, their flames behind amber glass that softened everything they touched, and on the counter at the back a pair of candles burned in low iron holders, their flames barely trembling in the undisturbed air. A third light source hung from the central beam, a small lantern of dark metal and clouded glass, and the light it threw was the softest of all, diffuse and warm, more like a glow than a light, like the last light of a winter afternoon gathered and kept. Everything the light fell on, it made beautiful. The wooden tables were the heart of the room. There were 3 of them, 2 long ones running parallel down the shop's length, and a smaller round one near the door, and they were covered entirely, generously, abundantly with flowers. Not in the arranged, formal way of a display, though there was beauty in the arrangement, but in the way of a room where working with flowers is the daily business of life, where buckets are filled and bundles are sorted and stems are cut and gathered and tied, and where the excess of all that quiet industry creates something that is less like a shop and more like a garden that has come inside for the evening. In tall, dark glass vases along the left table, roses stood in loose clusters, cream roses with the faintest blush at their centers, deep red ones, almost burgundy, their outer petals just beginning to curve away, pale pink ones so delicate in color that they seemed less like pink and more like white that had had a gentle thought. Their stems disappeared into dark water, and the water caught the candlelight and held it, small, still flames reflected in the bottoms of each vase, as though the roses were blooming above a very calm, very miniature sky. Beside the roses, lavender, bundles of it tied with plain cotton twine and stacked in a wide-mouthed crock of pale clay. The bundles were dry, and they rustled very faintly, the softest possible sound, like the turning of a page in a quiet library when the small draft from some unseen gap found them. Their scent was distinct within the room's larger perfume, cool and clean, and medicinal in the best sense, the scent of something that has always known how to calm. The second table held the wildflowers. These were looser, more various, more difficult to name. There were small white flowers on long stems that nodded when anything moved near them. There were yellow ones the size of buttons, gathered in clusters. There was something purple and feathery that you had no name for, and something else, a trailing, small-leafed vine that spilled from its container and lay across the table's edge in a long, curling tendril. as though it were simply resting there and might, if the evening continued quietly enough, decide to stay between the arrangements. The tools of the trade lay where they had been set down. A pair of long scissors, their blades dark with use, a spool of ribbon, pale green, almost silver, half unwound, a small notebook, its cover soft with handling, lying open to a page of handwritten names and numbers too small and too private to read from where you sat. A scattering of fallen petals on the table's surface, rose pink and cream, and the deep red purple of dried lavender, lying where they had fallen without anyone thinking to move them. They were beautiful there, like something painted. The linen curtain shifted and the shopkeeper came through. She carried a tray with the careful, practiced ease of someone who has carried trays for a long time and no longer needs to think about it. On the tray, a small earthenware pot, rounded and dark, from which a thin thread of steam rose and curled in the warm air. 2 cups, not matching, but similarly worn, similarly comfortable to look at, and a small dish holding a folded cloth and a few dried flowers that she had evidently added as a last thought. She set the tray on the round table near the door with a faint, settled sound and looked at you. "Chamomile," she said, with a little linden blossom. "And I added some dried rose petal, which does nothing particular but smells very pleasant." She poured without asking whether you wanted any. The liquid was pale gold, the color, almost exactly, of the lamplight in the room, and its steam carried the scent of the chamomile. Gentle, slightly sweet, with the faint honeyed quality of the linden behind it. She set a cup before you on the arm of the chair, on a small wooden coaster that seemed to have lived on that armrest for years, worn into a slight hollow in the wood. Then she settled herself into the chair on the other side of the round table, a chair of similar vintage to yours, its back slightly higher, its cushion a faded rose. And she poured her own cup and wrapped both hands around it and sat for a moment without speaking. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who have no particular need to fill the air between them. After a while, she said, "You have come a long way this evening." You agreed that you had, though the distance was difficult to measure. She nodded, as though this made sense. The evenings that bring people to Blossom Street are usually the longer kind, she said. The kind where you have been carrying something heavy for some time and have only just begun to notice the weight of it. You looked into your cup. The tea was very slightly too warm to drink comfortably, and you held it without drinking and let its warmth move through the clay and into your palms. "I find," she continued without urgency, "that flowers help, not because they solve anything, but because they are very honest about what they are, and they ask nothing of you in return for being beautiful. There is a restfulness in that." She reached out and adjusted, almost absently, a stem that had leaned slightly out of a nearby vase, a cream rose, its head full and just beginning to open, and set it back among its companions with a touch so gentle it barely moved the water. The traveler took it. It was lighter than expected, lighter almost than it had any right to be, as though it were more idea than object, and warm. Not the warmth of a hand that has recently held it, but its own warmth, interior and constant, like a coal that has been banked for a long night and still holds the memory of its fire. The luminescence moved again, and the traveler felt something answer it, a settling, a quieting, the sensation of a compass needle finding north. "I don't know what I'm meant to do with it," the traveler said. "Nothing," said Emiliano. "You're not meant to do anything with it. It isn't a tool." He seemed to consider for a moment how to say the next thing. When you're on the train and you can't remember what you're traveling toward, when you arrive somewhere new and the newness feels like too much, when the night is very long and you've lost the thread, he tilted his head gently. Hold it, that's all. Just hold it and let it remind you. Remind me of what? He smiled. The small private one, the one that wasn't for passengers. That you already know the way. The traveler closed the fingers around the vial and stood with it for a moment. Out the window, at the end of the corridor, the sky had shifted to a deep rose along the horizon's edge, and the rails below had caught it and were holding it, those faithful keepers of light, already preparing for the day's first reflections. A pigeon landed on the platform railing, looked around with the brisk authority of a bird that has places to be, and flew off again. Somewhere in the station's belly, the first proper sounds of morning were gathering themselves. You've given things like this before, the traveler said. It was not entirely a guess. Emiliano looked briefly surprised, then thoughtful, once or twice, when someone seemed to need it more than I did. A pause, and each time I thought I'd miss it, but I never did. It always seemed to refill somehow. The station keeps making more. There was a rightness to this that the traveler didn't need to examine. Some things explain themselves not to the mind, but to somewhere quieter. Can I ask you something? The traveler said. Of course. What is it you love about this? The night work, the empty platforms, all the arriving and leaving. Most people would find it lonely. Emiliano looked down the corridor toward the window and its rising light, and was quiet for long enough that the traveler wondered if the question had been too much. But then he said, I used to travel when I was young. I was always looking for the place where I would finally feel settled. I went a long way looking for it. A beat. Then one night I was working late, my first year here, and the last train pulled out, and the platform went quiet. And I just stopped. And I thought, oh, it's here. It was here the whole time. The traveler felt the small warm weight of the vial in the palm. It was here the whole time. They walked bound together to platform 4, and the station was filling now with morning's gentle industry. A woman arranging newspapers at the kiosk, 2 young porters comparing manifests, the ticket windows flickering to life one by one like candles lit down a long table. The 7:15 stood at its platform, patient and enormous, exhaling soft white breath into the cool air. A few early passengers were already boarding, moving through the yellow doorlight with their bags and their sleepy, purposeful faces, each of them carrying whatever it was they were carrying, toward whatever it was they were going toward. At the door to the carriage, the traveler turned. There were things to say. The traveler could feel them, a whole gathering of them. Words of gratitude and recognition, and the particular love one feels for people who give gifts without needing acknowledgement for the giving. But Emiliano made a small gesture, unhurried, that somehow absorbed all of it and returned it simply as warmth. Safe travels, he said. All of them. The traveler stepped up into the carriage and found a window seat, and the train began its slow departure. The platform sliding past, the station drawing back, the yards opening up into open country with their quiet geometry of rails and signals, and the blue morning light lying flat and clean across it all. Emiliano was already gone. Back to the station, back to the corridor and the platforms, and the long, reliable work of being present for whoever arrived next. The traveler held the vial up to the window. In the morning light, it glowed differently, warmer, less silver now, more gold. The luminous luminescence steady and unhurried. It seemed almost to pulse. Or perhaps that was simply the traveler's own pulse, felt through the fingers, the body's constant and ordinary miracle. The countryside moved past. The rails sang their quiet traveling song. And in the palm of one hand, small as a secret and weightless as understanding, the light went on, doing what it had always done, shining without effort. From the inside out, the dawn came in like something that had been waiting outside all night, patient and unhurried, asking nothing. First, there was only the suggestion of it, a loosening of the dark along the eastern edge of things, a softening, the way ice doesn't so much melt as simply stop being ice. Then, a color that had no name, or had too many. Not quite rose, not quite the gray of a dove's wing, but something that moved between all three, as though unable to choose and content not to. The mist that had settled overnight in the low places along the tracks against the station's stone foundations, pooling in the doorways of the goods sheds, caught this unnameable color and held it, and the whole world for a few minutes was made of nothing but that soft, suffused light and the stillness underneath it. The traveler stood on platform 4 with a bag at the feet and watched it happen. The Victorian station rose above in its old authority, the iron canopy with its fretwork edges, still lovely after so many decades of weather and steam. The red brick face of the main building, its high windows beginning to catch the first genuine light and return it in warm amber panels, the clock above the entrance, its hands moving with the same patient indifference with which they had moved for over 100 years, marking a kind of time that had less to do with minutes and more to do with the accumulated weight of all the arrivals and departures that had passed beneath it. Pigeons walked the roofline. A sparrow landed on the back of the nearest bench, assessed the traveler with one bright eye, and flew off satisfied. There was wood smoke somewhere, and something else, the particular morning smell of a working station. Metal and stone, and old timber, and the ghost of tea, and the clean cold air pushing through it all like a thread through cloth. The traveler breathed it in and thought, I will remember this. Not the trying to remember kind, but the kind that just happens, that settles somewhere wordless and stays. Emiliano came along the platform at 6:10, which was when he always came, had always come, would presumably go on coming long after this particular morning was only one more morning. In a long chain of them, he walked with his unhurried walk, coat fastened now, cap on, the professional version of himself restored. And yet the warmth of the previous night was still visible, the way lamplight is still visible in a room after the lamp has been turned down. Not bright, but present. He carried 2 cups of tea in the station's thick white mugs, and he offered one without preamble. And the traveler took it, and they stood together watching the dawn advance across the yard. The tea was too hot to drink properly, so they held it instead, and the warmth came up through the ceramic and into the palms, and this was enough. Will you go far? Emiliano asked after a while. Some distance, the traveler said. I'm not certain where I'll stop. You'll know when you get there. You said that before. The mist along the tracks was beginning to stir now, moved by the small breathing warmth of the arriving morning. It lifted in soft columns, drifted, broke apart into wisps that caught the light and were briefly golden before dissolving into nothing. The tracks emerged from it in stages. First the rails' polished crowns, then the wooden sleepers, then the whole long grammar of the line running away into the middle distance, where it curved gently and disappeared into a stand of trees, still dark against the brightening sky. Beyond those trees, the world, whatever the world was this morning, whatever it was holding, the traveler touched the breast pocket where the vial was kept. It was there, warm and constant. "I don't know how to thank you," the traveler said, "for any of it. The walk last night, the conversation, A small gesture toward the pocket. Emiliano turned his cup in his hands. "You don't need to. The station thanks people for passing through. That's what it's for." He looked along the platform in both directions, at the length of the thing, the stone and iron of it, the old reliable bones of it. "I'm just part of the station. You're the best part of it." He received this quietly, neither dismissing it nor being overwhelmed by it. He had the gift, the traveler thought, of accepting kindness without flinching, of letting gratitude land without deflecting it away. It was a rare thing, and perhaps only possible in people who had long since stopped needing praise to know their worth. The 7:15 was announced. The sound moved through the station with the low authority of a thing that had been announced 10,000 mornings before and would be announced 10,000 mornings after, neither triumphant nor sorrowful, simply factual. The world organizing itself in its usual way,